Oleg had always felt a strange excitement before long journeys. He stood on the platform of the Kiev train station, gazing into the darkness, where somewhere beyond the horizon, his train was supposed to appear any minute. The railway tracks disappeared into the distance, like an endless ribbon stretching into the unknown. This wasn't his first train journey, but this time something felt different. He couldn't explain what exactly, but an inexplicable sense of unease had been following him ever since he bought the ticket. With a creaking and whistling sound, the train finally emerged from around the corner and slowly, like a giant iron snake, pulled up to the platform. Oleg felt a wave of coolness run down his spine as he entered his carriage. There were few passengers, just a few people in the neighboring compartments, engrossed in their own affairs. The air smelled of metal and old wood, as if this train had witnessed countless years of travel. Oleg took his seat, spread out a blanket, and settled into the soft chair. He pulled out a book, trying to read, but the pages stubbornly refused to hold his attention. His eyes closed by themselves, and his thoughts became scattered. The sound of the wheels was soothing, as it always was during long night journeys. Oleg felt fatigue slowly overtaking him. He didn't notice when he fell asleep. When Oleg opened his eyes, he immediately felt that something was wrong. The train was still moving, but the landscape outside the window had changed so radically that at first, he thought it was just another one of those strange dreams he sometimes had. Instead of the familiar plains and forests, there was an unfamiliar landscape. High mountains with white peaks, dense forests through which dim light filtered. It didn't resemble any part of Ukraine or even Europe. Oleg sat up in bed and stared at the scenery. His hands instinctively reached for his phone, but there was no signal. No messages, no connection. Only a red indicator signaling total isolation. He got up, deciding to walk through the carriage to see if the other passengers were still in their places. The corridors were empty. There was no one in the neighboring compartments. He opened the door to the first carriage. The same thing. Everyone had disappeared as if they had never been there. The train was traveling empty, and that was unsettling. He approached the door leading to the platform and tried to open it to see what was happening outside. But the door wouldn't budge. It was locked with such force that it was impossible to move it. Oleg felt a slight wave of panic. He was trapped on a train speeding into the unknown, through unfamiliar lands. Suddenly, there was a soft creak behind him. Oleg quickly turned around. Standing before him was a man he hadn't seen in his carriage before. He was dressed in a dark coat and hat that hid his face. His figure seemed unnaturally tall, and when he spoke, his voice was quiet but distinct. "You shouldn't have fallen asleep," the stranger said without raising his head. Oleg took a step back, trying to assess the situation. His heart was beating faster. Who was this man, and what was he doing here? "Where are we?" Oleg asked, trying to stay calm. "You are in the passage." The stranger looked up at him, his eyes glowing with a cold, almost pale light. A place between worlds. It took Oleg a few seconds to process what he had just heard. He had read about such things in books and movies, but they were all fiction. Was this a dream? He clenched his fists to make sure it was real. The pain of his nails digging into his skin was real. How is that possible? His voice trembled, though he tried to speak confidently. What is this place? The man in the hat looked at Oleg as if the answer was obvious. You've crossed the border between reality and what lies beyond. We are all here, in the between time. Oleg didn't know what to say. This was all too strange and scared him more than he could have imagined. He had never believed in anything like this, but now everything happening around him began to suggest it wasn't fiction. "And what am I supposed to do now?" he asked, hoping for some hint. The stranger lowered his head again and then slowly exited the carriage, leaving Oleg alone with his thoughts. Time seemed to freeze, and he had no choice but to follow his intuition. Oleg returned to his compartment, sat by the window, and tried once again to make sense of what had happened. He knew this wasn't a dream. The world outside the window was a bizarre and surreal copy of reality, with distortions that made him doubt everything. Suddenly, the train began to slow down. Oleg leaned toward the window. Up ahead, he saw a vast city illuminated by soft, mysterious lights. The platform again seemed almost deserted, but there was a presence in the air. This place had a completely different energy. It wasn't like any city he had ever seen. When the train finally stopped, Oleg stepped onto the platform. He couldn't say where this path led, but he knew one thing. He couldn't stay on the train. This place seemed to be waiting for him. Before him opened a world he couldn't have imagined even in his wildest dreams. The city was filled with strange architectural structures, the air pulsed with invisible energy, and the streets, illuminated by unseen lamps, converged into a bizarre labyrinth. Oleg walked forward, feeling that each step drew him deeper into this new world, and with each step, his curiosity and fear of what lay ahead grew. Now he was only a guest in this other dimension, and there was no way back.